is the digital library? Well, it seems sometimes people think it's a contradiction in terms. Libraries are places. They're places that you browse stacks and you find cohesive collections. And digital is connecting, surfing, verbs, active, like the poster. So how do they fit together? Some people say, well, I don't really get it. If you just sort of scan all the books in the library, you have a digital library. What is this about? You could digitize all your tapes and scan paintings, and that's a digital library. Wrong. Very important. The digital library has 5 components that concern us as humanists and as technologists. The first component is creating new digital content. Yes, that's correct. If you scan all the pictures in your scrapbook, well, you've created some content. But that's not all. There's a second component, and that is new access mechanisms. When we have all this content, how do you find your way around it? I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about that as I proceed. The third, which is at the heart of certainly many of the people in this room are working on networking, well, if you have all that content, you need to improve networking in order to get the content from one place to another, or there's no point in having it. The fourth area that I'll discuss is understanding new ways that digital data are used. So once we have all this content, well, what do people do with it? We have very little understanding of that. And the fifth point that I will focus on and really go into some detail, that's my technical area of research, is formulating new presentation methods, ways to give us information in ways that we can really understand it better. Now, this is a multidisciplinary area with multidisciplinary goals. And this is very important for us as technology people to understand ways that we can work in an environment that takes different disciplines into account. In order to make the digital library a success, well, we certainly need computer scientists. That's why many of you are here, but not all of you. We need engineers, that's for sure. And we need library and information scientists. A field, by the way, which is becoming more and more technical and is dominated by women. Linguists, that's my background. Psychologists, understanding user behavior. Policymakers, how can we send information around? Barbara Simon's comment was very timely. Lawyers, what about intellectual property? Look at all these different fields. To make the digital library work, we need to open up to work together. And this is something that Anita discussed in some detail, how to work together in a larger community to create this information and make it more usable. Now, the first area that I talked about was content. Oh, sociologists, forgot them. Sorry if there are any sociologists here. And anthropologists, and the list goes on. How do groups of people work together, etc. What are the showstoppers? This talk was supposed to focus on the future of the digital library. Well, there will be no futures if we don't solve these problems. The first problem that I'm going to discuss is information overload. We have all experienced it in this room. You don't have enough time to read all the stuff that comes at you. One of the solutions I'll present later in the talk is different methods for presentation of information. Another issue that I'm not going to focus on, but I think is really critical, is the global nature of information. We need multilingual applications. We need ways to search across languages, to find, to structure information across languages. So far, you put a query in English, you get back information in English. Well, what about all the rest of the languages in the world? We miss that. And the third problem is one that I will not focus on, but must not be forgotten. The intellectual property issue. Of course, legislation matters, and new technologies for wrapping metadata around digital objects so that you know who can use what, under what conditions, payment, commerce, and use. This is a showstopper. This is a very serious issue. Whoopsie. Creating new digital content. Let's go back to where we were. My point one was creating new content. Now, there are two methods of creating content. One is scanning. There's a large project at the Library of Congress, and this is the kind of thing where if you take your scrapbook and you scan your pictures, we've all done it, you create new content. There's another large project that's going on that Getty is funding to scan in museum pictures for use in education. And then there's lots and lots of information which is digital from the start, like Newswire and books and journals. Now, this may seem trivial. We all use the web. We know there's lots and lots of content out there. So what's the big deal about content? Why is this interesting? Well, the big deal is that it's very complex to produce content that's sophisticated. For example, at Columbia we have a project, Columbia and Berkeley has a project also funded by Mellon on illuminated medieval manuscripts. Now, if there's anyone in the room who has ever seen any of these things, there are images, there are different kinds of fonts, there are annotations of who wrote what, who printed what, etc. So we need to represent complex information, images, comments, typeface. This is not just a Newswire article or a straight HTML document. Very complex structure. There's another project I want to mention specifically, which is to digitize papyri. Now, I stutter because that's a real hard word to say, okay? This is not my technical area. There are skilled specialists that are required to scan and represent these papyri with information on where they came from, what are the markup, what kind of material, etc. So as any of you can imagine, this is not just your straight Newswire. It's not an HTML document. You need to know what's the material, where did it come from, all kinds of metadata, to say nothing of just the plain scanning, the scanning of a fragile document that you have to do in a certain dry room with certain kind of equipment that won't disintegrate this very delicate piece of material. This is the kind of content that needs to be brought up in the digital library for it to be successful. So this is not just a scholarly issue, however. It's very difficult to get a focused collection with enough material on a single topic. Take, for example, the diversity collection. This is a project that Anita and I have been working on to gather together material on the training and retention of women and minorities across sectors and across levels, industry, government, universities, K to 12 and up. Those of us here who are dealing with these issues, it's a lifelong challenge. And so this is very difficult to put a collection together and get it cohesively represented so you really can find the information you need. That's the digital library, one of the challenges. And of course, there's the intellectual property issue that sort of buzzes around all the time. Can you use that information? Now, I said that I would cover 5 points. So far, I've talked about new digital content, making information available, which is more than just a news feed. Creating new access mechanisms is another issue. We all grew up with traditional libraries where you walked in and you went to the card catalog. Nobody uses a card catalog anymore. They're really outdated. Has anyone in this room used a card catalog in the last 5 years? Raise your hand if you did. That's it. That's a smattering of people, right? That's maybe 15%. In the last 3 months, raise your hands. There you go. So we all know this is happening. Access mechanisms refers to ways to find the information. Now, who made card catalogs? We know there are library and information specialists who know particular domains and know how to catalog items. And we know how much more effective an electronic catalog is, where you can query on all the fields, and really it's much more effective than the sequential limited card catalog search. But access mechanisms, most material isn't indexed by a librarian, so we need to develop automatic indexing methods and new search methods, because we certainly know that the searching and indexing that we have now is not effective. That we would all agree on, I'm sure. The third issue is improving networking. Now, this is a point that I'm not going to discuss due to time, because I really want to go into detail on the final 2 points, which is more the subject of my own research, to give you a little bit of meat on in the research area. But obviously, networking is critical. With no railroad tracks, it doesn't matter how much information you have. All the medieval illuminated documents and Newswire, it won't go anywhere without the tracks. I'm going to concentrate on the 4th and the 5th points: discovering ways that digital data is used, and formulating new presentation methods. This all has to do with the fact that we have too much information and it's disorganized, and how do we find our way around it? First of all, the ways that digital data are used. There's a long tradition in the library science field of people working on information-seeking behavior. How do people use online information versus hard copy is still an open issue. And this requires psychologists, librarians, teachers, all kinds of interdisciplinary work that we need to pull together. Let me give you an example of one project right now. This is the Columbia University Online Books Project, funded by the Mellon Foundation. Here are the questions that are being asked. How are online books different from paper? How do people use online books? What kinds of instructional tools can be built for online books? Most of us in our daily life, when you access information electronically, look at bits and pieces. You rarely look at a full document. Well, what about when you have a full document? How do you use it? What do you do with it? What do students do when we teach our humanities courses with books online? How do they use this material? These are very complex issues, and nobody knows the answers yet. And here's a place where psychologists and technology people really need to come together to improve our access and to improve how we use the content that we're making available. Let me go now to the fifth point, and this is where I'll spend most of the rest of my talk. The fifth point is on formulating new presentation methods and the digital library. Before I continue, let me refer back to one of the comments that Anita made in her talk. The digital library, creating new access and new content, access methods and new content, is part of one of the motivations that I have for working in this area has to do with universal access. We do live in a world of haves and have-nots. And we live in a world where technology is only available to a small number of people, and all this beautiful digital content, newswire, updates, etc., multimedia briefings, very few people have access to. By creating new methods of presenting information, by understanding how users interact with information, both in the one-on-one and in the more collaboratory situation, here's an area where we can really have impact. And that's one of my motivating, one of the motivations for working in this area. You'll see as I talk about the research, because the next part of the talk is really going to go into new presentation methods. How can information be used? Well, there are several different technologies that are being focused on now. Obviously, you need effective filtering of the documents. You need visualization techniques so you can see information in different ways. You need personalized information delivery services, and summarization. Summarization is the topic of the research that I'm going to discuss next. There are lots of products out for summarization. You might ask, well, so what? Summarization, it's easy, it's solved. Not so. These are first stage products that are out on the market, and they're very effective. They're fine for what they do. But they're limited, and I want to tell you exactly how they're limited and how we, as researchers, are moving beyond those limitations for something more effective for people. A typical summarization program works in the following way. And all of the systems I mentioned and all that are out on the market are working this way with a few bells and whistles, but basically they're the same. The first thing is that these extractions are done based on word frequency. So words like a and the and up, they're eliminated. Every single document has them, so they're not discriminatory. Sentences are picked with words that distinguish that sentence from all the other sentences in a document. So we're talking about you pick up one document, I want a summary of this document. Automatically you eliminate the and the of and the a, they're not important. And you pick out the sentences that really distinguish that article from others. Well, there's certain limitations and certain problems with that technique. For example, if you are interested, you lose important concepts. If you're interested in the price of down, you'll never find it. because down is out, along with the and a and of. This is serious, okay? Then you'll see the point. Okay. And now what happens if you want to summarize something like the 10 Commandments? Let's look at an example. We took the 10 Commandments and put it through one of the summarizers that's out on the market. And here's what you get. If you're a really busy executive, you put the setting to 2%. I only want 2% of this document. So what you get is, thou shalt not kill. Okay? That's what you get out of that. Now, if you have a little more time to read, you say, okay, I want a 7%. Let's set it at that level. You get, thou shalt not steal. And you get that thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And if you have a lot of time, you can, with 10%, honor thy father and mother. Okay? That's what happens. Well, wouldn't you rather have something like this? The 10 Commandments say not to steal, kill, bear false witness against thy neighbor, etc. A cohesive summary. This is what we're aiming for. And this is the technology that we're working on, this kind of results. So you saw the limitations of the typical extraction techniques is that you have these disfluencies. The sentences don't hold together. They don't flow. It's often unreadable. You have little dangling sentence pieces. Let me give you this specific example. This is a real example. We took a news article and put it through a different summarization system. And we got the following sentence as the summary. The Trouble Food Company decided to restructure management organization in order to blah, blah, blah. You don't know what it is. Is it Kellogg's? Is it Campbell's? You have no idea. It picked this sentence because Troubled Food Company distinguished that sentence from all the others. Maybe Kellogg's or Campbell's Soup, I think it was too frequent in the document, so just put it out. This doesn't help you. So really, you don't know who this is. And the other thing is it's very difficult to compare across documents. You're stuck in one document at a time. There's too much information. We need to summarize across documents and in a coherent way. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the research that we're doing. The project I'm going to discuss is generating coherent summaries. Kathleen McEwen, who is chair of the computer science department at Columbia University, and I are co-PIs on the project. It's funded by the National Science Foundation in the Stimulate program. We are aiming for more effective summarization. Here are the unique aspects of our research. We're summarizing across sets of documents. We are using symbolic and statistical techniques. Shallow knowledge, we have 2 stages in the analysis stage, and language generation. I'll discuss this a little bit further as I go along. Our goal is concise and coherent, to produce a concise and coherent summary across sets of documents with sentences that flow. Why are we doing this? Because what I showed you of extracted sentences, they're not a summary. What we use is those extracted sentences to further analyze them, to create a conceptual representation. You want to know what the article is really about. As a linguist and as a psychologist, psychologists have built resources, and linguists are working on this area because you're looking at underlying conceptual structure. Later processing omits the extraneous material like thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. You don't need it 3 times. And generation occurs over those representations. Kill, steal, covet thy neighbor's wife, etc. The project team, the members are listed here, co-PIs and the students. We were very fortunate to have a student working with us this summer who may be here, in the CRA summer program for undergraduates, and she's from Berkeley. And as I said, we take a 2-stage approach, very different from what I showed you at the beginning, of analysis and generation. Our information goes into conceptual structures, and then we aggregate similar concepts and create new sentences with computational linguistic techniques to generate language. This is research in project, so please don't run up and say, can I have one? But if you're working on this, all right, we're working on evaluation techniques, examination of structures over sets of documents, and testing with human judges. Now, if you're working on this area, obviously I'd like to talk to you because we have lots to talk about. What I've described is a summarization approach over text across documents to summarize multiple documents in ways that help users digest the amount of information that's online. But there's lots of information online which is not just text, there's multimedia. And there are needs for different kinds of summaries. So as users, you might want the kind of summary that I just showed you, or you might want a briefing, just an update on what's new. So let me briefly describe a contrasting system, the Columbia Digital News System. People who are involved are listed here. The Columbia Digital News System is quite different. That system gives illustrated briefings and follow-up search with live multimedia information. Now, obviously, we're using some of the same technologies, but this has a different focus, to give timely updates on new developments. Our goal here is the last bullet on this slide: coherent access to a range of media, not only text, images, video, dynamic multimedia, whatever else. How do we get coherent access to that information? The next slide tells you about what I mean by a briefing. I mean integrated information from multiple multimedia sources, information that's of interest to you, the user. Here's where psychologists come into play. And you want to convey maximal information quickly, so you need, good presentation techniques. Now, this screen shows you the kind of display that we're talking about, and the words are not important to read. The point is that at the top, you have a summary. That's a textual summary. The next slice tells you that you have an unedited video, and the bottom slice gives you the source articles. Maybe you don't want the summary. You want to find something that you want to really go to the source. This is the kind of interfaces that these are the kinds of interfaces that we're building with the technology at the back end to do the summarization and the filtering, the analysis and the generation. So we're working with the people in the School of Engineering on the access to images and multimedia. Now let me wrap up with 2 challenges slides. Carolyn's talk outlined and really set out in a very humorous but accurate way the kinds of challenges that you face when you go into changing areas and new fields, particularly one which has such far-reaching implications as the digital library. There are 4 challenges in the summarization area, and then I'm going to present some challenges in the digital library area. The first one is multiple documents. So far, dealing with single documents is not too terrible. Multiple documents, this is a real challenge. How do you figure out which documents to choose, and how do you put things together across documents? Multiple user needs. What kind of summaries do you need? What kinds of presentations? We need to handle this for people who are differently abled. Multiple languages. I discussed that briefly. And finally, multiple data types, all the multimedia questions, video, image, text. The digital library challenges that I've discussed, of course, are content, how to get content up in a coherent way, intellectual property, so you can use that information, the globalization of information, which brings up multilingual issues, and what I focused on today is effective presentation of information, including summarization and visualization.
If I get a medical document summarized for me, who's a computer scientist, I probably need some definitions of some of the terminology, which a neurosurgeon probably would just want to skip altogether.
Right.
But there is this thing about personalizing and customizing documents versus creating a community of usage. If you really differentiate things you produce for certain users, and they see basically a completely different version than other users do, how do you bridge this? How do you bridge personalizing and maintaining the sense of community that you get from people actually seeing the exact same thing?
I'm not quite sure what your question is. I mean, certainly we have a project to, using the language generation technology, to summarize patient records. Now, if I, the patient, am requesting that document, what I need from that summary is very different than my cardiologist requesting that document. And now what's the question? I'm not quite sure what your question is.
I think that is true in certain occasions, but in other occasions, you really do want similarity so that people get, like newspapers. Mm-hmm. If I get the New York Times delivered and somebody else gets the New York Times delivered, and you filter out all the documents that I say I'm not interested in, mm-hmm. which I may not be, but the
right.
fact is that the New York Times delivered to both of us creates some community. I can call somebody up and say, oh, did you see this article here and
right,
there?
Right.
And the point is there's a real trade-off between customization and community. And I was wondering if in the research you guys are doing, that issue is being addressed, or how it is being addressed.
It's not being addressed, and I know that there are people at Park who are addressing that issue, so this is an important one to consider. It's, I know that there are a couple of groups at Park and other places, Michigan, for example, that are dealing with that issue, and it's a very important one. I'm glad you brought it up.
Hi,
yes.
I'm Jody Daniels. This is sort of a plug for both Women in Computing and Digital Libraries in that Ed Fox down at Virginia Tech is putting all master's and PhD dissertations online. And he's looking for people to volunteer to turn theirs in and make them accessible. You can retain your copyright and all those sorts of things. They accept a variety of different formats. I'm sorry, I don't have the webpage address, but it's Ed Fox at Virginia Tech.
Right. But you can get to that webpage through my webpage, actually, because we are participating in that project. Thank you.
I'm Monica Schrafel, University of Victoria. This is really exciting, the digital library, and one of the things that my group is working with at the University of Victoria is actually what you've mentioned about customization. And the idea is versioning data so that you can have the same document as your cardiologist wants. And if you need definitions, it's using the interface of that document. The browser of a web browser becomes an interface that allows you to select depth, audience, mm-hmm. and detail, so that you're actually creating documents that can be versioned depending on what your interaction requires. So that if you went to that site, that context is what we've called it, you could say, I'll set the same parameters on my interface to pull out the same version or the same dimensions that you did. I can see the same thing, or I can zoom in. The implications for these kind of new accesses to document delivery opens up a whole world of sharing source documents, of creating a textbook that'll work the same for a nuclear physicist as a junior in college, mm-hmm. just by being able to use the interface to version text. And I think in terms of community, opens up the possibility for multiple authors to contribute to the same document. So community of generation of documents becomes possible. What do you think?
That's a really good point, and actually both of your comments relate to that point, that it's almost a political issue. It is a political issue, it's not almost. Why should your medical provider, that's your doctor, have access to information that you don't have? I mean, all of us in this room are educated. We can read that. If we don't understand it, we know where to go to a thesaurus. We know where to find out. And I'm sure that we've had those kinds of situations where you're prevented or it's blocked from getting access to that kind of information. So it's very, very important, I think, what you both brought up, that if you're presenting information differently for different profiles, well, you don't block being able to get the other points of view. So a couple more questions, I think.
I think you were first.
We're doing okay? Yeah.
I was wondering if you address the issue of tampering with the files that this digital library is, that you no longer have a tactile actual book to reference to. So once all these things are no longer in the physical realm, they're all in virtual space, they can easily be tampered or slightly altered or removed altogether. And like, for example, book banning, that's kind of easy to tell if a book has been banned because it was on the shelf and now it's not. But with like virtual space, there's no, you can't browse really the files. And if one file is gone out of maybe 2,000, nobody would really notice. And it would be very easy to rewrite history for better or for worse without having to go through the trouble of having big book burnings in public squares and things. 'Cause you just get a few crackers and
delete.
And that's it. Yeah.
You've brought up two important questions. One is the authentication issue, and that's version control, authentication, who wrote this, the plagiary issue, etc. That's where I think, where the technology world comes in, creating appropriate metadata structures to keep track of version and authentication is essential. The second point that you brought up about, well, we no longer have the physical book. This is a kind of issue that, I don't know if you were quite bringing this up, but I would like to just comment that when I say that I'm directing a research center on the digital library, I often get, well, you're not going to get rid of books, are you? And the answer is no. Nobody wants to get rid of books. We all know you cannot read in the bathtub with your laptop. We know that. This is a fact. They're really not mutually exclusive. It's adding technology and making things available, enriching what we already have, but there's just no way to replace the physical object of a book, and nobody wants to do that. It does affect the way that you interact with material and how you archive and pick the authenticated version, and that is a serious issue.
Do you have any comments on comment server? Foresight Institute is one of the companies working on this, where you can, for instance, I may have a way of summarizing a document, someone else may have a different way, and they're working on a server where you can find editors that you like, or summarizers, or different ways of handling metadata about different documents that are not specifically attached to that document?
This is a quick question. No.
Thank you.
It's a quick answer. What can I say? I don't really. Thanks, Judy. And the final question, yes.
My name is Viviana Sandor, and I'm working in image processing and getting my PhD at William and Mary. I heard you talking about summaries based of text, and I was wondering what is the stage in your project related to summaries about images, and what would a summary be of an image, and if things like low-level image statistics and maybe edges, maybe a texture, as well as patterns, and would be taken into account, and how would what's the stage in your project related to that?
Let me answer that very briefly. Most of the image work takes place in the electrical engineering department, and as many of you in this room know, the state-of-the-art in image understanding is advancing quickly, but we still have a ways to go. I would refer you to our webpage, to the references, because it's a very long answer, and it's not really my central area of research, but it's a very important one. What we do work on, however, is the integration of the text and the image, and we've been making progress on that, but it's slow going. It's very difficult, ontologies. Let me make the final comment, if I may, and just emphasize that the digital library is a major component of universal access, and universal access means exactly that. Access across modalities, differently abled, genders, nations, classes, something we all really need to work for. So thank you again for your time.